This mind is radiant, the Buddha said, but it's darkened by passing defilements. So exactly where does that radiance lie? He's not saying that the mind is innately pure. Ajaan Mahabua makes this point very clear. If the mind were innately pure, then how did it get defiled? And if a pure mind could be defiled, what's going to happen to it after it gets purified again? It could get defiled again. In fact, Ajaan Mahabua says the radiance of the mind is actually part of its main defilement. The defilement that's left when all the obvious defilements go away. But the Buddha said it's because of this radiance that we can train the mind. So he's obviously not talking about the enlightened mind or an innately enlightened mind. He's talking about a mind that has a potential to literally clean up its act. And it comes down to the fact that the mind can observe itself. Our problem is that we're not very observant, which is one of the main tasks of the meditation, is to get the mind still and to get it asking the right questions so that it can observe itself. And particularly it can observe itself making choices. There's so many choices we make that we're oblivious to. It's like a large corporation where decisions are coming out of the corporation and no one seems to be really aware of who actually made the decision. So we've got to get the mind still so we can catch it, because obviously the mind is hiding some of its decisions from itself. That's what ignorance is all about. We've got to get the mind clear about what it's doing. So part of the clarity comes from the vocabulary the Buddha gives us for analyzing what's going on, say in terms of fabrication, particularly the way the mind shapes its experience through its intentions. The breath is shaped through our intentions. That's the bodily fabrication. And then we talk to ourselves with certain intentions in mind. That's verbal fabrication. And then mental fabrication of perceptions and feelings, the images we hold in mind, and then the feeling tones that we focus on and encourage. Again, we're awfully ignorant of how we encourage these things. As the Buddha said, this is how we shape our future lifetimes, through these types of fabrication. Unfortunately, we can observe it as we meditate. In fact, we use these types of fabrication to create a state of concentration. You focus on the breath. You talk to yourself about the breath. And you use perceptions to help you stay with the breath. Ask yourself what kind of perception helps the mind to settle down, to have a sense of ease with the breath, thinking of the breath as a whole body process. Because as the Buddha says, when the mind settles down, it has a sense of pleasure or even rapture. You want that to permeate the body. And the best way to do that is John Lee's recommendation. You think of the breath as the element that fills the whole body. What you got here is breath, breathing breath. To perceive it in that way gets rid of a lot of the harshness with which we sometimes breathe. There's a still breath, there's the moving breath, and you want them to all be coordinated. Hold that perception in mind and talk to yourself in these ways. And you get the mind to settle down, and you get more conscious of how you do these things. That's not the case, as we discussed this afternoon. It's not the case that one is always the cause. although John Lee points out that verbal fabrication is probably the most important to watch out for, because we can tell ourselves all kinds of things. The way we talk to ourselves can make us miserable, make us happy, given the same set of circumstances. And of course, when we're talking to ourselves, we're using perceptions. So those play a huge role as well. You change your perceptions, that changes the conversation. But then again, sometimes it's the breath that leads the way. You wake up in the morning, you find yourself breathing in a weird way, creating headaches, creating discomfort in the body. And that gets you talking to yourself in ways that you don't particularly find useful. So if you notice that happen, you've got to change your conversation. In other words, use whichever handle you can grab hold of out of these three types. But the important part is that you get conscious of the fact that you are making choices. And you're going to be alert to see when the choice is made and what kind of discussion goes into it, and then the results of following through with that choice. That ability to step back and watch these things, that's the brightness of the mind. That's what allows us to train the mind. If we didn't have that kind of brightness inside, we'd be helpless in the face of our defilements. So that's where you look for the radiance. And being with the breath gives you a good place to step back from what's going on in the mind. So you can watch. And it's through this radiance that we can nourish the Dharma inside. Remember the Buddha's statement that there are two things that nourish the Dharma. One is commitment, and the other is reflection. And this ability to step back and reflect, that's how we learn. It's in the Buddha's instructions to rule at the very beginning of the practice. Be conscious of your intentions. And ask yourself, where are they going? Where would they lead you if you followed through with them? And if something is unskillful, and the intention seems unskillful, then don't follow it. The reason for that is because if you act on intentions that you know are unskillful, it's going to be hard to learn from them. You're going to tend to hide from yourself the fact that you could foresee that it was going to be unskillful. When you start putting up walls like that, that's darkening the mind. So you try your best. After all, how are you going to grow as a person unless you try your best? Years back when I was teaching at the university, they had me teach literature courses. And so for one of the courses I had the kids reading The Good Soldier by Ford Madox Ford. It's not the easiest book to read, because the main point of the story is that the narrator is lying to you. He's trying to keep some secrets from you, even as he's telling you the story. So the story jumps back and forth. Every time he gets to something sensitive, he skips over it or jumps back. And of course, for the students reading this as a second language, it was pretty confusing. So I set out a timeline, did everything I could to help them. But there were complaints. And one day one of the students asked me, John, why do you give us such difficult things to read? And I said to her, if I give you easy things, what would you learn? It was like a light bulb went off over her head, and she turned from a C student to an A student. It's when you stretch yourself, you do your best, and then you find out the best isn't good enough. That's when you learn, because then you can ask yourself, well, what could I have done that would have been better? That's when you put some light into your mind, or you allow the light that's there in the mind's ability to observe itself to have a chance, so you're not constantly covering it up. So you're acting on skillful intentions, but you discover that what you're doing is actually causing harm. You stop. You don't just blunder your way through, saying, well, it was a good intention, so it's got to be good. You have to ask yourself, well, maybe something was wrong with the intention, so I stop. There's nothing that you're doing that's creating harm. Okay, you continue with the action. Then when it's done, you reflect. What were the long-term consequences? You see that you caused harm. You talk it over with someone who's more advanced in the path, and then you make up your mind not to repeat that mistake. The talking it over, this is for verbal or physical actions, is to help you get so that you're not ashamed to discuss it with yourself. As for mental action, you don't have to tell everything bad that's gone through your mind. But still, you have a sense of shame over the fact that you gave into jealousy, you gave into pettiness and resentment, or whatever it was. When you recognize that there was something wrong with the intention, and you decide not to repeat that. This is how you learn. This is how you shine light in the mind, or allow the light in the mind to show itself. And this is how it's useful for developing the mind. As the Buddha said, if the mind were not radiant like this, you couldn't train it, you couldn't develop it. And so through this combination of commitment and reflection, that's how you make more and more use of the light of the mind, the radiance of the mind. Because we do have this ability to make choices in the present moment that don't have to be determined by the past. The Buddha was very critical of people who said that everything you experience is determined by the past, which means there must be something in the present moment that is not determined. And you can take advantage of that ability to choose, that ability to be conscious of your choices. That's where the radiance begins to show. That's how you learn. It's not the unconditioned mind or the unconditioned consciousness. That's something separate entirely. But it's a path there. It's a bright path. And as Ajahn Mahabua points out at the very end, you have to abandon even the right path to get to the real, what's really valuable in the mind. But wherever you see a glimmer of brightness, follow that for the time being, as that's heading you in the right direction. You want to get to the point where the brightness of the mind is the only defilement remaining. Get rid of the obvious clouds, and you can get more and more in charge of your own training. Because if we didn't have this radiance, we'd have to depend on other people to come and save us. And as the Buddha said, there's nobody else who can be your refuge. You have to be your own refuge. So take advantage of what radiance you find in the mind, and encourage it by this ability to step back and observe, to be alert and mindful. So you can check on the results of your ardency to see if they really are heading in the right direction. That's how the radiance of the mind helps you to develop. And can take you to something beyond it.